Hey everyone, let's just dive right in. Have you ever wondered if the actual blueprints for our massive, intertwined modern crises, things like accelerating climate collapse and extreme inequality, are actually buried deep in the ruins of ancient empires? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're dusting off a truly fascinating perspective. It's one that looks at ancient history not just as some dusty rearview mirror, but as a literal survival map for where we are right now.
Look, I totally get it. A lot of us have felt a little alienated from ancient historical wisdom. And honestly, it makes sense, right? It's often because modern capitalist culture and relentless developmentalism are just so incredibly loud. Or sometimes it's because these texts have been buried under hyper-individualistic, conservative, or patriarchal interpretations. But the source material we're breaking down today offers this profound, refreshing shift in perspective. It treats the Quran not as a passive history book, but as an active, diagnostic toolkit. It uses these ancient narratives to expose the underlying pathology of any civilization that oversteps its ethical boundaries. So here's our excavation map for today. We'll be looking at the archaeology of power, towers of techno-feudalism, eco-imperialism, financial fraud, the infinite growth myth, and finally charting a radical path forward.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the archaeology of power, digging up the present.
The really crucial thing to understand right off the bat is that this archaeology doesn't offer a simple chronological timeline of ancient dynasties. Instead, the source presents it as a deep ethical critique of power itself. It's literally digging up the present by looking at the ruins of the past. Think about it. Our global civilization today is facing this intertwined matrix of existential crises. We're talking accelerating ecological collapse, extreme wealth stratification, and the very real rise of authoritarian technocracy. The source argues that by using this ancient diagnostic toolkit, we can actually name and confront the root causes of these exact modern fractures. Moving right along to Section 2, Towers of Techno-Feudalism, Constructing the Divide. Okay, so when we examine the material infrastructure of tyranny, which is famously modeled in the text by Pharaoh and his chief architect, Haman, we first need to define its driving force. And that force is Istikbar. According to the source, Istikbar is this inflated, systematic pride. It's a structural arrogance that leads elites to deem themselves entirely above accountability to the divine and to the collective public. This hubris is exactly what drove Pharaoh to build massive vertical towers. These were mega engineering projects designed to project an illusion of godhood, enforce total surveillance, and fragment society into exploitable, isolated little factions. And the source draws this absolutely wild, brilliant parallel here. Think about Pharaoh's physical towers of subjugation. Now, compare that to today's techno-feudalism. The analysis points out that modern megacorporations are essentially building digital towers, monopolistic algorithms, and total surveillance networks that fragment the public into easily manipulated filter bubbles and precariat labor classes. The big takeaway? Technological advancement, when it is stripped of ethical accountability, inevitably just becomes an instrument for subjugation. Which brings us to Section 3, Eco-imperialism and Extraction, Destroying the Commons. Now we shift our focus to civilizations that engaged in predatory resource extraction, like the ancient mountain-carving empire of Thamud. Their whole story centers around a highly specific test of ethical governance, a stray she-camel. As the text notes, she was granted an equal right to share the community's water. The source actually frames the she-camel as a living representative of the non-human collective, the natural world itself. But the corporate elites of Thamud, they viewed her as a pesky obstacle to their maximum resource acquisition, so they literally slaughtered her. This was a violent refusal to share the natural commons, and it triggered a systemic collapse that buried their entire empire. There's another really striking parallel in the ancient kingdom of Saba. They relied on this incredibly sophisticated communal dam system. But as the elites there grew wealthy, they financialized this public infrastructure purely for their own insulation, favoring elite cash crops over communal security. And the result? A catastrophic flood that swallowed up both the rich and the poor alike. The source maps this perfectly onto today's world, where elites insulate themselves in private climate enclaves, basically trading ancient dams for luxury doomsday bunkers, while totally neglecting public grids and storm barriers. Eco-apathy, it turns out, is essentially a structural engineering failure just waiting to happen. All right, on to Section 4, Financial Fraud and Enclosure, the Invisible Violence. So, shifting gears from physical and ecological violence, we look at the invisible, structural violence of financial systems. We see this in the ancient trading empire of Madian. Interestingly, Madian wasn't destroyed by some outside military conquest. It rotted from the inside out due to financial corruption. The diagnostic concept here is buckus. Buckus implies systemic undervaluation. It's the manipulation of the true worth of goods, of labor, or even ecosystems just to generate artificial profit. Madian legalized the theft of value by tipping the scales of trade, allowing the powerful to structurally siphon wealth straight from the most vulnerable. So how does this bahas actually show up in late-stage capitalism today? Well, the source identifies it in the undervaluing of global labor and the externalizing of massive ecological costs, essentially treating the Earth's resources like a limitless free buffet. This also ties right into the Quranic parable of the owners of the garden, where wealthy heirs secretly plotted to hoard their crop harvest from the poor, only to wake up and find their entire estate completely blighted. The source argues this exact ancient enclosure is mirrored today when agrochemical conglomerates ruthlessly patent seeds and criminalize mutual aid, which destabilizes the very social contract that keeps us all alive.
Section 5. The Infinite Growth Myth, the Pathology of Accumulation. Okay, so we've basically arrived at the climax of our explainer. All these empires we've talked about, Pharaoh, Thamud, Saba, Madian, they all fell. And the underlying pathology driving every single one of them was istikbar. This is such a powerful economic critique. Istikbar is the pathological drive to accumulate wealth and resources for the sheer, obsessive sake of accumulation, entirely detached from actual human need. The source explains that this is the theological equivalent of our modern myth of infinite GDP growth. It acts like a collective psychological narcotic, creating a total delusion of invulnerability that distracts humanity until we quite literally visit the graveyards. Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is how the source reframes a traditional concept using a modern progressive lens. The traditional jinn are often just known as mythological spirits, with the word literally meaning that which is hidden. But the source anchors this in a divine cosmology that doesn't separate the spiritual from the material. In this light, the jinn are the hidden, structural socioeconomic forces and elite classes. Just like dark money pools and offshore tax havens operate entirely behind closed doors, these hidden forces extract massive surplus value and labor from everyday humanity. It's a brilliant structural critique of invisible exploitation. Finally, Section 6, A Radical Path Forward, Antidotes to Collapse.
We can't just diagnose the disease, right? We need the antidotes. The ultimate purpose of this archaeology is to inspire real, progressive, systemic transformation. The source identifies the primary antidote to the endless accumulation of istikbar as infaq, which is the intentional spending and horizontal circulation of wealth. And what exactly should be circulated? The text gives a simple, one-word answer: al-afiyu, meaning the surplus. The argument here is that in a healthy, progressive political economy, wealth accumulated beyond personal need cannot ethically be hoarded to fuel endless corporate growth. It rightfully belongs to the collective, to heal our socio-ecological fabric.
To make this a reality, the source maps out 3 massive structural shifts to transition our civilization away from ecocidal capitalism. First, we have to dismantle the tower, moving from corporate hierarchy to shura, or inclusive democratic councils. Second, we must protect the She-Camel, shifting from reckless extraction to amanaha, treating the earth as a divine trust. And third, we absolutely must balance the scales, moving away from the systemic undervaluation of buckus toward ad, which means true economic justice. So, according to the analysis, translating these ancient principles into modern actionable steps means focusing on 3 things. Number 1, governing our technology and media infrastructure via transparent public utility councils, not massive tech monopolies. Number 2,
legally institutionalizing the rights of nature so our forests and rivers are protected from marketing closure. And number 3, adopting ecological accounting and cooperative ownership models that flat out refuse to shortchange the planet for quick, artificial profit.
The overarching lesson from this whole archaeology of power is incredibly stark, yet honestly deeply comforting. Structural injustice is, quite simply, unsustainable. No matter how big the empire or how advanced the algorithm, it cannot outrun the material laws of justice. We have a real choice here. Will we continue plowing the earth into a toxic husk, completely blinded by hubris, or will we learn from the ruins and step into our calling as cooperative caretakers of a shared, sacred creation? The blueprints for a better world are literally right there, just waiting to be unearthed.